today's topic is handling the boredom of success. So, where does this actually come from? All right, maybe some of you have heard people refer to it in this way. Maybe people use other words such as monotony or tedium or just the repetition of whatever you're going to have to repeat in order to become successful. And some of you may know about this, even if you never put a title on it, you may know about it just from personal experience that becoming successful at anything requires you doing a lot of the same things the same way over and over and over again, like we talked about back in episode, I believe that was episode 2013, but let me check. Yes, that's correct. Episode 2013, the same things the same way every time. And again, maybe some of you had never considered it or thought about it ever before, but whichever group you're in, what I'm going to share here today is 100% true and 100% the reality of becoming successful in whatever you either are doing or what you plan on doing, and even things that maybe you have already done. So if you want to think back to that situation, all right, this is part of the game. So becoming a success, ladies and gentlemen, is generally more boring than it looks like on TV. And when I say looks like on TV, what I mean is any image that you can see of what quote unquote success looks like. So this includes your phone. So success is not a whole bunch of photo shoots, VIP parties, getting past velvet ropes, red carpets, and everything looking bright, shiny, and perfect. Even though maybe that's the way that you imagine it to be. Maybe that's the way that it is impressed upon you by people who you deem as successful showing it to you. Maybe that's the way that maybe if you are already successful and or when you become successful, that's the way you're going to portray it to others, because that draws in attention and gets them to pay attention to you, listen to you, and maybe even buy from you and follow you. And I will verify that that does actually work. Doesn't mean it's the truth. Those are two different things. What influences and persuades someone to take action is not necessarily something that is true about that individual. I think we all can agree to that, right? You can agree that if a gentleman, you're looking at a girl on social media, what influences and persuades you to be interested in her may not be the whole truth of who she is. Can we agree? And ladies, you can say the same thing. And maybe you don't see them on social media, but whatever the situation is, you all get it, that you can draw someone in with the sizzle, but the actual steak may be a different story. Right? You can make any steak sizzle, even if it's a cheap piece of shit steak from the local grocery store bargain aisle of the frozen goods section. So understand that success is not this bright, shiny, perfect thing that where everything is just going amazing. It's often a whole lot of the same stuff over and over again, done tediously. And the challenge in doing this is the ability to stick to the process despite the monotony that comes with it. That's what we're going to discuss here today. So let's get to it with point number one. Topic, once again, is handling the boredom of success. Number one, how do you show up when the job is no longer exciting? Or the task or the process or whatever words you want to give it eventually is going to become, what I said, a job. Because when I say a job, colloquially, what I mean is a job is something that we may not always be excited about, but we understand, excuse me, as responsible adults, that we have to continue to show up to the job, because doing the job is what allows us to create the resources or outcomes that will allow us to take care of ourselves, our families, our communities, our loved ones, and whoever or whatever we're responsible for. So when I say the word job, when the job is no longer exciting, can you keep showing up? Or if you are showing up, how are you showing up? That's the question. And again, this is a version of what we call the third day. If you're not familiar with the concept called the third day, you probably hear the advertisements around the show around it. I wrote a book about it. I'll tell you about that in a second. But the third day is all about how, when you hit the wall, and the wall being the point that you realize that the thing that you signed up for is not going to be all fun and games, it's not going to be one big party, it's not always going to be exciting. When you hit that third day, what do you do? It's not a question of if you're going to hit the third day. And I don't care if you're playing a sport, if you are a fashion model, if you're an entrepreneur starting a business, if you are a parent raising a child, if you are a school teacher teaching in the fifth grade, eventually you're going to run into a day, or a day is going to run into you, when you realize that the thing that you signed up for is not always going to be fun, exciting, and interesting to you, yet you are still responsible for doing the job. That's the third day. The question is, what do you do when the third day happens? That's the whole concept. The frame of the third day that we have over here is all based around what you do when it happens, not whether or not it does happen. It absolutely happens to everybody. And I wrote a whole book around it. You can get that by going to thirddaybook.com. We give you the book for free. Just cover the shipping. Again, it's a physical book we'll send to your mailbox. So the question is, what do you do when that shininess has worn off and you are still expected to show up and deliver, yet you don't have the quote unquote motivation or excitement pushing you to show up? And the good news about not having motivation or excitement to show up is that you can call on other resources that are actually more reliable and more long-term sustainable than discipline. And I guess you can even call it inspiration. Not strike discipline from that. Things that are more long-term, reliable, and dependable than motivation and inspiration and excitement, such as discipline. All right, discipline is actually a good thing. That's sustainable. That's long-term. You can rely on it all the time, even when you have zero motivation and the job's not exciting or whatever you're doing is not exciting. Maybe it was never exciting. All right, some of you have jobs right now that you were never excited about. Maybe you're excited about what you get from the job, but you were never excited about the job itself, yet you still show up and do your work. All right, that is discipline. I get asked often when I'm on other people's platforms and I appear on other people's podcasts or get interviewed, and I share a little bit of my background, which if you listen to this show, you've heard me talk about. And inevitably, it usually comes up in the conversation, Dre, where does your discipline come from? Where does this stick-to-itiveness, this consistency, this dependability of performance that you have or that you've developed over the years, at least when it comes to putting my stuff out there, such as this show, and what I did as an athlete and how I produce content, et cetera, where does it come from? And the answer is always the same. The answer is it comes from my upbringing. I had two parents at home growing up, and they did not have jobs that were nearly as exciting or quote unquote motivating as the job that I have. So I get to do this. This is fun for me. Recording this show, this is fun because I get to talk about stuff that I want to talk about. Nobody is dictating to me what subjects to discuss. Nobody tells me how much time I have to take or how much time I'm allowed to take when I talk about this stuff. I play professional sports for a living, which is, I will verify, the best possible job you can have. Is actually more fun than the job that I have now. But all the things that I do today as an entrepreneur, for the most part, I have complete autonomy over what I do, when I do it, how I do it, and with whom I do it. There's some things that I still got to do that I don't always want to do, but for the most part, I have full autonomy over how my work works, and I don't have anybody telling me what I can or cannot do or say, etc. My parents' jobs were not like that. Now, my parents did dabble in some entrepreneurial, I guess you would call them small business owner things, but my parents were generally, they did the bulk of their work as employees. And I know, this from, first of all, my mom. I would hear her talking to other people about it, that she wasn't always excited about her job or her coworkers. And my father, he didn't talk about it, but I had been to where he worked. He's retired now, but I've been to the place that he worked. And trust me, and my dad worked in what was basically a factory. And there was nothing exciting or inspiring about that factory. I worked there. I remember one summer when I was 14 years of age, he got me a job, quote unquote, working there. And I was just doing little menial tasks, painting walls and counting inventory and stuff like that. And it was nothing motivating or inspiring about working there. Even at 14 years old, I was not motivated or inspired by it. I just liked the fact that I could get a little paycheck and I had something to do in the summer, which is what my parents cared the most about. The point being, my discipline came from seeing my parents go to work every day, even though they were doing things that were not motivating or exciting. They weren't doing those speaking gigs and TED Talks and recording a show where they could talk about whatever they want or posting on Instagram, but they had to go to work every day, and they had serious responsibilities behind that. And that's where it came from me. That's where the discipline started with me. And discipline, when you have it, is a major opportunity for you for several reasons. One, that I already laid out. Another is that very few people are disciplined. Very few people are disciplined. I don't do too many interviews on the show, but one person who I have interviewed is my friend Wes Pfeiffer, who was my college teammate back in the day. And one of the things I remember him saying on the show was that, I don't know if he came up with it or someone said it to him, but I'll give him credit for saying it. He said, "How many people do you know who are talented? And then ask yourself, how many people do you know who are disciplined?" And usually the second number is a lot smaller. All right, we don't know. How many people do you know? All right, let me pose that question to the audience. How many people do you know who you can say, you can certifiably say, this person is disciplined in this particular area? Then flip it around and ask yourself, how many people do you know who are talented in a particular area? Now, where the magic happens, ladies and gentlemen, is when someone has talent and discipline in the same thing at the same uh, vocation. So somebody might be talented in one area, but disciplined in another area of life. They can't become super successful in that area. The magic formula is when you have a high level of talent and a high level of discipline at the same thing. That's when you become amazing. Those are the people who are known worldwide for their success because they have both. And actually, you don't have to be worldwide known to have it happen, but that's the magic formula. So many of the people who are looked at as the best in their respective fields these days are not and were not necessarily the most talented or skilled people at the thing that they're doing. So many people who are at the top of their fields to this day, whether because they're known or just because of performance or because you know a lot about that specific space, even if they're not famous, they were not necessarily the most talented. Maybe they were close, but they weren't the most talented. They simply have more discipline. And they have a certain amount of talent. And this is I've used this example before as well. As an athlete myself, I was not the most talented athlete, but I was talented enough to kind of be above the cutoff line for a potential professional player. I was above that line, but I wasn't so far above the line that it was a no-brainer for me to make it. What allowed me to make it was the discipline that I combined with that good enough talent that allowed me to surpass some of my peers over the years as an athlete. So as long as you continue to show up, assuming that you have a baseline level of ability, even through the boring and tedious times, you keep showing up, the more talented people may not have that discipline, and that allows you to slowly surpass them. So if, for example, the professional athletes, and my background is in sports, so if a professional athlete means you're a top 2% performer in your sport, so there are people all the way down to being only in the, let's say, the top 8% of talent who still become professional athletes. Are you following what I'm saying here? So the professional athletes are the people who are the top 2% performers in, let's say, basketball. But there are players who are only in the top 8% of talent who still make it as pro athletes. So how does someone who's only in the top 8% make it into the group who are in the top 2%? Because their discipline allowed them to take the spot of people who were higher on the talent poll, but didn't have the discipline and therefore lost their opportunities. And that works in every space. Sports, I'm just using sports or basketball as an example here, but this works everywhere. So a person who has only top 8% talent, only top 8%, could end up grouped with people who had top 2% talent just because the person with the top 8% stuck to the plan longer than others who had top 2% talent did, and they just mess it up in some way, shape, or form. An example that I've given you, some of you may have heard me say this, that my senior year of high school, after basketball season ended, school wasn't out yet, but basketball season was over. I saw a bulletin board posting that said, come try out for this Sunny Hill League basketball team. Those of you who don't know basketball or you're not from the southeastern Pennsylvania area, Philadelphia area, Jersey, etc. Sunny Hill Basketball League is like the best amateur league to be involved in if you play basketball. So if you're a young man and you're not yet in college and you play basketball, that's the place to be, is the Sunny Hill League. So any player who's from the Philly area who is somebody has played in that league. So Tim Thomas, who's from New Jersey, Kobe Bryant, who all of you know, DeJuan Wagner, many of you may know him. DeJuan Wagner Sr., not his son. I believe his son is a player to this day, not Junior. Junior probably played there as well. Jameer Nelson, who's from the Philadelphia area. Any player from Philly played in the Sunny Hill League. I went to this tryout just off a bulletin board posting, not knowing who was going to be there. When I walked in the gym, all the players in there were like the best players in the city. It was like 20 guys who were all the best players in the city. I didn't know any of them personally, but I knew who each one of them was because they were publicly noted for their success in the newspaper, which is how we got information back then. And none of them knew who I was. And I ended up playing on that team. I didn't play much. I, for the most part, sat the bench. But it was a confidence builder for me, just the fact that I was on the roster with those guys. And the only reason I was on the roster is because I showed up. And there are plenty of other players who I knew about that tryout, but they probably told themselves, you know what, I'm probably not going to make it, so I might as well not even try. And also, when I first showed up to that tryout, there were amongst the 20, you had the 20 known guys. These guys are all D1 scholarship. They weren't even showing up to this as a quote unquote tryout. For me, it was a tryout. For them, it wasn't a tryout. It was just this basketball practice. There were like 3 or 4 other guys who were nobodies like me. So I was one of the 3 or 4 nobodies who showed up at the initial tryout. I was the only of the 3 or 4 nobodies who continued to show up. That's the reason why I ended up on the roster. Because had all 4 of us nobodies kept showing up, the coach may have had to make a decision, and the coach was a guy named John Hardnett. So any of you who's from the Philly area, you know anything about youth basketball in Philly, John Hardnett was a very well-known guy. And he might have had to make a decision to, all right, I got to cut some of these guys. We've got too many people, and some of these nobodies got to go. I might have got cut. And, based on talent alone, I probably would have gotten cut had he decided to make cuts. But he didn't have to make any cuts because I was the only nobody who kept showing up. So he didn't have to cut me. Well, we can keep this one nobody guy on the team. I was the one nobody guy. So he kept me on the team, probably because he didn't need to make a decision. And that helped me a lot, again, sitting on the bench with these guys, just because I was now amongst them. And we all know the law of association. You become the average of the people you spend the most time with. So just being on the team with these guys, even though I did absolutely nothing of note on the team, still helped boost my confidence. And that led to the history that happened after that when I got to college. Moving on to point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is handling the boredom of success. Number 2, can and how do you take action when you truly don't feel like it? Right? This is the crux of what life is about in general right here. What do you do when you don't feel like doing the work? Especially when it comes to creating and sustaining success, because everyone who's listening to this show, you want to either create or sustain success in some area. You wouldn't be listening to a show called Work on Your Game. You damn sure wouldn't still be listening 17 minutes into this episode if you weren't looking to create or sustain success in some way. So since all of us have the same desire, why do we all end up with such differing outcomes? The reason we end up with different outcomes is because of what happens when we are not super excited about it and we truly don't feel like doing the work that we know we're supposed to be doing. Some of you right now are listening to me and not doing work that you know you're supposed to be doing. All right, so let me give you a reminder. Go do your damn work. All right, keep listening to the show while you're doing it. It's a good thing about audio shows is that you can be doing a whole bunch of other things while listening to this. I tell you something about me. I listen to stuff all day. Like if you were in my home office, is hardly ever silent. All right, there's always, actually, sometimes I have my headphones, so you can't hear what I'm listening to, but I'm listening to something literally all day. I'm a sponge for material. I want to call it information, just material. So I'm listening to audiobooks, podcast episodes, YouTube videos, social media stuff even. I'm consuming all day, every day. The point is, the reason I'm bringing all that up is to say, is that my consumption actually fuels the stuff that I put out here. So I wouldn't have 3,000 episodes just of randomly brainstorming information out of nowhere. I take a lot of information in so I can put a lot of information out. The point being here, bigger point, is what do you do when you don't feel like doing your job? How do you show up? Do you take your time? Do you waste time? How are you continually showing up? This is the crux of life right here. All of us have days and time periods when we don't feel like doing anything, but we're supposed to be doing something. Again, some of you at this exact moment I'm describing. Some of you listen to my voice right now. Again, you ain't doing something that you're looking at it right now. You're like, I know I'm supposed to be doing that. Do it. Okay, let me give you a little boost of motivation right there. The most successful people share the trait of being able to move themselves to action, especially when they don't feel like moving themselves to action. They do it anyway. They do not negotiate with themselves. They don't let themselves off the hook. And they do not allow themselves to say, I'll get to it later when they know they're supposed to be doing it now. All right, remember one thing that I told you, changing your default settings in life from slow and later to fast and now, respectively. You want to be more successful in life, just start doing that. All right, all of you have the capability of doing that. You need no special knowledge, information, or tools to do it. Instead of doing things slow, doing fast. Instead of doing things later, doing now. All right. Is there anyone who cannot start doing that at this exact moment? Exactly. So no change in skill, knowledge, achievement, or resources necessary to enact this habit that I'm giving you right here. And again, all the things that you actually want, skill, knowledge, achievement, and resources, guess where they come from? They are a byproduct of you moving yourself to action at the snap of a finger instead of whenever you get around to feeling like it. Human beings very rarely feel like doing things that look like work. And let me give you another key here, is that even the most successful people you know of, the most disciplined and hardest working people you know of, they don't feel like it just as often as you don't feel like it. The difference is how somebody feels and what they actually do do not necessarily have to be the same thing. In other words, because you don't feel like it doesn't mean you don't do it. And just because so actually let's leave it right there. Moving on to point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is handling the boredom of success. Number 3, things becoming routine is normal and expected. It is not something to fight against or try to avoid. Let me say this one again. Things becoming routine is normal and expected, not something to fight against or avoid. Anything in life experienced often enough becomes boring, routine, normal, and loses its excitement. And when I say anything, I mean anything. All right, anything eventually loses excitement after you experience it often enough. So, any of you listening to this, you have some aspect of life or some experience that maybe you've only experienced a few times or never, and you want to, or you want to experience more of it. I'm here to let you know. I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm here to let you know that eventually you're going to experience enough of that thing that it won't be as exciting to you anymore as it seems right now today. This is inevitable. This is just human nature. We adjust and adapt and grow accustomed to anything if we get enough of it. Okay? This is not something you should try to avoid, fight against, or hope never happens. And this applies everywhere. This applies in relationships. It applies in marriages. It applies in businesses. It applies in sports. It applies at school. It applies in anything that you're doing. It applies in making money, anything. Eventually, you get used to it, and it no longer gives you the same high that it gave you before. All right, this is the reason why a drug addict, for example, at least from what I've heard, the drug addict eventually needs to take more and more of the drug to satisfy their desire for the high, simply because the amount that they used to take when they first started 3 years ago is not the same. That amount does not excite them anymore because they've grown accustomed to it. So they need more and more and more. And this is how people go down the spiral of addiction. And again, this can apply to any other aspect of life, by the way. Okay. And this is something that I needed to have heard this when I was an athlete, especially in college, because I would get bored with basketball team practices. I never got bored with practicing by myself and working on my game on my own because I could see myself developing, getting better, etc. But team practices often would bore me because we would do the same stuff over and over again. And it didn't really give me a chance to, based on what we would practice, I didn't always get a chance to kind of showcase my stuff because we would be running through plays and doing these random drills, and it was slow and boring and monotonous. And I would get bored with it, and my effort would wane because of this. And I wish I had known what I'm telling you here today. What I wish I had known this back then when I was playing. I think I would have been a more consistent player had I known this stuff. So again, but once I got to the pro level, I'll add on to this story. I had a more of a motivation, if you will, to show up every day in practice because I understood that my job was literally on the line every day in practice. And a bad practice gets you fired as a professional player when you're playing overseas, especially as an American. But that's a different story for a different day. So again, don't try to fight against or hope that it never happens that you get bored with anything. And it also doesn't mean you should give up on something just because it's boring. When the excitement wears off, that doesn't mean you should stop doing it. Okay, the excitement always wears off. So if you did follow the formula of quitting anything once it was no longer exciting, you'll be trying, starting, and quitting thousands of things over the course of your life because nothing will remain exciting. What the professional does is discipline themselves to keep showing up even when the excitement is no longer part of the deal. Anyone who's consistent and a professional at what they do has plenty of moments when they do not feel like doing their job, maybe even a whole week or month when they don't feel like doing their job. But if you were to observe them at the job, you couldn't tell me which day they didn't really feel like being at work because their performance is still consistent. Their output is still consistent regardless of how they feel. And you don't even know how they feel because their performance looks and feels exactly the same every time. This is what makes a pro a pro. What makes a pro is that their performance is the same regardless of how they're feeling or what they're doing. I mean, not what they're doing, how they're feeling or how excited they may be about the work that they're doing. Their performance looks exactly the same every single time. Before we recap, I'll leave you with one last thing that I remember hearing Michael Jordan say. And he said that once he became known as the guy in the NBA, which was pretty early in his career, he understood that there were fans who would come to the games every night that he played, whether at home or on the road, who were there just to see Michael Jordan, who would rearrange their schedule, save up money, everything, just to see Michael Jordan play one time. And Michael said that he felt a personal responsibility to make sure he showed up the way he was supposed to every night because he understood that those fans were showing up to see him. All right, all that said, let's recap today's class, which is handling the boredom of success. And this comes in anything that you do, any vocation you decide to get involved in, this will happen. How do you handle it? Number one question is, can and how do you show up when it's no longer exciting? This is also known as the third day. You will run into the third day, do anything for long enough. The third day will come and meet you. Question is not whether or not it will happen. The question is, what do you do when it happens? Number two, can and how do you take action when you truly do not feel like taking action? This is the crux of what separates the wildly successful from the okay, the good, the average, the mediocre, and the terrible. What do you do when you don't feel like it? Nobody always feels like it. I don't care who the person is. I don't care how motivated and excited they always appear to be on camera. Nobody always feels like it. But the most successful people do their job at a higher level even when they don't feel like it. Number three, things becoming routine is normal and expected, not something to fight against or try to avoid. So in other words, do not go looking for different gimmicks you can employ that will keep things exciting and spicy in what you're doing. I mean, maybe there are some areas in which maybe you want to do that, but for the most part, this is not how it works. All right, things are going to get boring and routine, and you need to keep showing up and doing your job any damn way. That's what makes a professional a true professional. With that said, make sure down below in the description to wherever you're listening to this, we got my text number, so you can be in my text community once we start sending that again. Also, Work on Your Game University. Those of you who want to work with me directly, y'all know where that link is down below in the description as well. That's just workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre, all